Seems like it happens this way a lot for me. I remembered one last thing I wanted to say about loving one another. Well, quite a bit after I closed out last time with the thinking out loud about what John wrote in John 1 John chapter 3 verse 23. And this is his command: to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. Here's the one thing. I love Jesus as much as I love the person I love the least. When I first heard that, it was like somebody threw a brick at the middle of my forehead. Whambo. At first I thought, come on. The more I've thought about it, the more I've realized it's almost impossible to quantify love in the first place. But this qualification thing, you know what? That it does stand to reason that I can do that. Is it really true that I love Jesus only as much as I love the person who I love the least? Wow. For me, it sets a compelling, confrontive context. And in these days in my life where the lines seems like they're getting drawn more clearly with what in my mind is right and what in my mind is wrong, and I don't even mean politically, I'm talking about culturally as a whole, well, maybe it won't make any difference to you, but they were strong words for me. And as I thought of them again, the impact hit me with full force once again. So I just thought I'd pass the fun along. How's that? In verse 24, John writes, "The one who keeps God's commands lives in him, and he in them." This is a very important concept, and there are people, I think, who take this idea and they create a kind of legalistic adaptation of it. Jesus, in a similar kind of way, Jesus spoke these words: "If you love me, you will keep my commands." So I think what Jesus was saying is, here's how you can verify your love for Jesus: by obeying him, by doing what he commanded. Here John writes, "The one who keeps God's commands lives in him, and he in them." So we have this relationship that goes on, that the one who keeps God's commands lives in God, and then God lives in him. Here's where I want to land on that, and it's going to take me a while to unpack it, but my obedience is never a means to get God's approval. My obedience will never make God love me more. And I say this because I believe that God cannot love me any more than he already does. And he's promised he won't love me any less. I believe that my obedience is not a means to getting anything from God, but it is an expression of the condition of my heart and my desire to live in him. To live in him is an interesting idea, and I'm not sure that I have a great way of illustrating it. But something that happened in my experience has been a little bit helpful, so I'll pass it along. In Debbie's and my work with Open Door Libraries, we have this distinct privilege of traveling to Berlin, Prague, and to the Middle East to be on site at our open door libraries in these locations and offer pastoral care to the staff. And when we're there, we try to spend about a week in each location. When we're there, we're Americans visiting those 3 locations. But while we're there, we're in their location. So it's not like America comes with me. And one of the crazy things that people sometimes do is when they'll go to another country and they expect the other country to be like the country they came from, right? I see this happening in lots of different ways. The folks that I know who travel abroad and most often are gratified by it and enriched by it are people who go there and attempt to assimilate as much of that culture, that country, and that way as they can, as opposed to going there and resenting that they don't speak English, they don't cook their meat the way I like it cooked. These vegetables, what's up with that? Their ketchup tastes funny. Why don't they? See, on and on it goes. So that's like saying, I'm coming to your country, but I resent the fact that your country is not like mine. I grew up this way. It's got to be right. For me to be in Berlin means, if I want to make the most of it, I accept and adapt to the ways of Berlin. It's an imperfect and very inadequate way of saying when we live in God, instead of expecting God to accommodate my preferences and how I like things and how it's always been with me, I then adjust to His way, to His design, to His standards. This is sometimes, I'll be frank, this is uncomfortable. Just like there are a lot of times when Debbie and I travel abroad, we're uncomfortable. We don't know the language. Sometimes we don't know the accepted social practices. Unless somebody tells us how many stops before we get off, we'll miss our stop on the tram because we don't understand the language. We don't know the landmarks. But when we lean into that instead of resenting it, and we adapt to it, we've had some of the most outstanding experiences in our individual and married lives. And I wonder sometimes in my life with God, how silly it is of me. It's not just silly, it's stupid to say I want to live in God, but expect Him to adapt to my preferences, my ways, my tastes, my. You can't, if you're going to live in Him, then it's about Him. And John, well, he doesn't use my words, but isn't that what he's saying? The one who keeps God's commands lives in Him. You see, keeping His commands is an expression of the fact that I am living in Him. Because if I'm living in Him, then it's His way, it's His design, it's His command that becomes my priority. And there's a whole lot of spiritual immaturity that hinders living that way. When I choose to keep God's commands, then I find myself subjugating my preferences, my desires to His, adapting because I'm a sinner. I have 67 years of practice at sinning. I have to adapt and move away from that in order to live in Him. And there's this wonderful reciprocal relationship that when I live in Him, He lives in me. It's not a one-sided deal. It's not like I just, I exert my own energy and my own whatever, my own pushpa, whatever word you would use for it, so that I can obey His commands and live in Him. And that's, no. I demonstrate that I'm living in Him by obeying His commands, and He lives in me. And then John goes on to say, and this is how we know that He lives in us. Okay, hold on to your seatbelt here, because you're getting big stuff. And this is how we know. Anytime you read, and this is how we know, it ought to pique your interest. Here it is. And this is how we know that He lives in us. We know it by the Spirit He gave us. Oh, come on. All right. Why am I saying that? Well, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I have had this experience where I've asked, what does that look like? I know that I can know that He lives in me because of His Spirit that's given to me. How can I be sure the Spirit is given to me? Well, some people say it's easy. Do you speak in tongues? Do you have a prayer language? No, I don't. Well, I don't know. Other people are, that's one extreme. The other extreme is, God's Spirit, it's just, it's everywhere. So that it becomes either it's all connected to some ecstatic experience, or it's totally disconnected from anything because it's everywhere. I struggle with this. So if you want to do an interesting word study, just again, we're so blessed to be able to do this with a plethora of Bible computer programs, but do a word study where you look at where in the Bible, especially in our context, the New Testament, is the Spirit written about, spoken about. Well, I found 3 came to my mind. I had to go look them up to get the exact reference for them. 2 of them are from the book of 2 Corinthians, and the other is from the book of Ephesians. 2 Corinthians 1:22, I'm going to have to read it because I don't have it memorized, is He set His seal of ownership on us and put His Spirit in our hearts as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. So that the Spirit that He put in our hearts, He put His Spirit in our hearts as a guarantee of what is to come. And a similar concept in 2 Corinthians 5:5, Paul writes, now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. So that His Spirit, not just a Spirit, but His Spirit, the Holy Spirit, has been put in us by God. We didn't do anything to get it. God put His Spirit in us. It's a guarantee that there is more to come. And then in Ephesians 1:14, the Holy Spirit, who is a deposit, guaranteeing our inheritance until the redemption of, and now I lost it, the redemption of those who are God's possession to the praise of His glory. You see, His Spirit in us is always connected with redemption. those that God redeemed, he put his Spirit in. And John says this is how we can know he lives in us and we live in him. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. Oh, can you guess we've got some more unpacking to do on that? We'll do it. Well, we'll get started anyway next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.